All right, good morning. I'm here today with Millie to visit about what is one of the quintessential books in horsemanship, Think Harmony with Horses. And I'm so excited to have what I hope is just the first conversation about this book, because we could have many, many conversations about it. So let's get started just by going back and thinking about the time when you wrote this book.
When you mentioned that we could have had many, that's sort of what I was thinking about driving in. The actual book, the material for the actual book probably didn't start gathering until about the mid-70s, 1970s. But from the beginning from the beginning of Ray working with horses, I had always went out to the Krill. And when I was a kid here in Bruno, my big thing wasn't sports. I was one of the runs, so I wasn't very active there. But my activities was most of it focused around our newspaper. Our little school put out a little newspaper called the Bobcat, the Bruno Bobcat. And so it was important that you get all the news all the time. So I went around with a little pad and a pencil. Besides that, when you got to be a senior, you could get breaks from school just to go out and do things that were relevant to putting out the paper. You could go sell advertisements, you could go collect special stories, you could do all kinds of things that got you off campus with a pass, legal. So paper and pencil was kind of my background. And after Ray began to work with horses, in the stage where he was teaching other people, it was important to write down what was being said and how it was done and what was going on, the goings on. But when after he met Tom and realized it was so different than anything we had been introduced to, that it was important that it be recorded, then the recording became more serious and more little notebooks got used up. So as people, then other people would want to come to the group learning situation. They weren't even called clinics. They were just, hey, get-togethers, to start with. When we were going through that stage, other people on the fence and in the barn and around were wanting to have a memory of it on paper, but they were busy watching. So they wanted somebody else to do it. Somebody should write this now. So it just evolved into more of a project. And then by the time we got to the middle of the 70s, and he was really traveling to do clinics out of state and out of country even, the keeping notes got more important. And it more or less evolved from there, and people say, this should be on paper. And would follow through by saying, I would want one. And partly because of that part of the interest, it evolved over a long period of time.
Yeah. But from the beginning, you felt like it was there was a feeling that there was something going on that was different and needed to be recorded.
Oh, it was extremely, it was completely and different. Yeah. Yeah. The dust in the crowd was way different. And so it really, we really focused on trying to understand what Tom was trying to teach, trying to share, because he was never not trying to share. And then there were different people along the road that did influence going ahead and producing it into a book form. But just from the beginning, I can remember even the different ranchers and people that we saw that would come and share what we were trying to share of Tom. I can remember Tom Marvel saying, "Now you are going to make a book, aren't you? You're going to do something with this."
Well,
So we had a lot of encouragement in that respect.
that it was interesting what you said, that Tom Dorrance was always keen to share what he was doing. Did you find that was that in itself was different from what the history had been of working with horses?
Well, yes and no. People who were as drawn to, there were people that were conservative about what they'd share because they were going to show their horses. But in Nevada, in our beginning, most of those old cowboys and the ones that had something to share and seemed to be getting a better and easier job done were generous to help the younger generation. They never were. That element of out behind the barn had more to do with people that had started early on to compete. So when I say compete, go to the county fair and show some important event, and had a few secrets they kept. But Ray was such an eager, naive, I want to learn person that not very many people put him in that category because he was so eager to know and to learn and to improve for the sake of himself, for his idea of what he should be able to do. And so that was really, and of course, everybody knows the story of the fact that when Ray was participating in the showing world down in California, that the horse that he had that had so much talent, but also had a lot of races, the horse he called Honda, and the fact that he had to have help. That horse could either perform like a world champion reining horse, or he could look like he should belong to Cotton Rosser. Very good. He was very good at bucking and balling. He'd be turning with a cow down the fence and something would upset him and he might just have to buck us to turn the cow before Tom came to work with Ray. So that made it so extremely, I mean, it was I better figure this out space.
Yeah.
In a way, it was very definitely needed.
But the fact that he was, and this might be a little bit away from the book, but that he was open to changing something within himself as opposed to moving on from that horse. I think we think a lot of times about people who are interested in having horses perform. They might not take the time Was it that the horse was that talented, or was it that it was something in Ray that was interested in improving?
Well, it probably starts clear back when he was an infant, because he was born with a disability. He was born and with what they in those years called a club foot. I have no idea what they would call it now, but the little guy couldn't walk, and he didn't walk. His brother was 15 or 16 months younger than he, but his brother walked before he could ever walk. So he always had a problem with moving, with I don't know, which is being a kid. And when he was about 4 years old, or almost 5, in that stage of life, they decided there was a new process that they could use that could help him. And it seemed, after the fact, when he was an adult, I heard the story, I thought, oh my night, what a deal. But they cast this little kid. He lived in Idaho, but over in Utah was where the people were that were going to help him live with his problem. And so they cast it, and he was in a cast for months, and that was going to make it be straight. What it did is force a lot of things to happen and set up for when he was an adult, it all fell apart. And he actually, but at that point, I guess there was no surgery as we know it. But so he'd always had a strong feel of his own identity. What can I do? What can I contribute? Who am I? Because little kids do that. Little kids feel, if they're different, they certainly know it. And living away from home, the weird thing to me was about it, when they took him down there for this process, it was going to take as much as 6 months. And they told his parents, don't even come back to visit him. It just makes it harder. You leave him till this is finished, which I can't, in my wildest imagination, think anybody would do now.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
things were different. Ideas were different. And so this situation that he was born with continued to be a factor the rest of his life. And partly the fact that he couldn't run and keep up with the other kids was partly a little bit of why he wanted to be the one that rode a horse and did things on horseback, because he always had the limp. He always had to overcome this situation. And then there was a climax of that later on, after we had spent half of our 20s, in our early 20s, he went to Nevada. But there were always older men who were in his life that would visit with him and influence him towards something that fit him better. That was pretty typical of the Western culture in the Western ranching. There's some fellow that would notice a young person trying to do something different, trying to improve themselves. And they wouldn't make a big issue of it, but they'd kind of out behind the barn suggest, well, this you could try. You might want to do this, or this is one other way to work with what you're challenged by. There were mentors that for for somebody who needed one and was looking for them. There
Mhm.
were mentors in the society. That was not unusual.
Okay.
And right from the beginning, when he was working on feeding cattle, getting some money by driving on a wagon, dumping the cattle, there was somebody on there that said, you know, you might want to go down to Nevada. And he had been there. You might want to go down to TLAZS and get on the wagon and live a little longer season on a horse and not the tractor. So that was a very appealing idea. And in 1950, Albert Harley helped him get on the wagon at the TLAZS, which
Okay.
started the whole southward movement into horses more and more.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
So
let's jump forward a little bit. I'm sort of interested to think about that Think Harmony grew out of people coming to the clinics and wanting to take something home with them to remember that experience or the gatherings. Talk a little bit about those early people that were coming with their horses. They didn't know anything about it. Was brand new. So who were they who were coming to learn?
there was variety. But the most challenging time probably was after Ray in a situation in California where he was showing somebody his horse, their horse. He was riding a horse for somebody else, and he was just going to show him how good the horse was going. But he had fed a little bit in his arena, a little bit of hay, created a little slick spot. And as the horse loped around, he went down, and everybody standing around heard the pop. Well, he got up to stand and couldn't, and that was a day to make another adjustment. And he was in a cast then. So every so often through the years, Ray had stayed in touch with and visited with Greg Ward. And Greg, of course, was a Cal Poly graduate and somebody who's come out doing really well from college in his horse business. But he was always busy, but he was always looking for something, or somebody was always looking for him. So this people in Canada had asked him if he knew somebody who would just come to Canada up to Lethbridge to this little community college. And the idea was that person would be up there giving the lessons, and the lessons were in the evening. It was part of the summer curriculum at the Lethbridge College, and it would be some novices and some not so novice, but they had a horse program that they were proud of. And so Ray went, good grief, I'm in a cast. So he just told the guy, well, if you can use a man with a cast to his ass, I'll come. He didn't have anything else to do, anything to go, anywhere to be. And so that's exactly what he did. I went to Lethbridge in a cast. But it was the most learning thing, probably, as far as sharing what he had learned and was learning. It was probably the most learning experience he could have ever had. Because before that, he would say, someone would ask him and he'd say, just a minute, I'll get in there. I'll get on your horse. If it's okay with you, I'll get on your horse and I'll show you how we can work with that problem. I can show you how you can communicate. But it had nothing to do had nothing to do with a long line of how-tos or verbalizing at all, because he didn't have a language. He didn't have a way to communicate. So when he couldn't get on the horse, wow. I didn't go with him when he went. He was up there 6 weeks before. We had 2 at-home children, and Kathy was a freshman, going to be, and Elaine was going to be in the 6th grade, and we didn't go up. He'd been there at least a month, maybe more, before we went up, and we drove up then, and I could not believe how much he had learned to express different, just the normal stuff that became easy for him to talk about, how much he had sharpened up on how to communicate to the rider. And then he was up there long enough that the people that were coming got extremely interested. They were coming in from the little towns outside of there. There was one little town that was about 30 miles away, and the name of the town was Raymond, and it's still there. However, they said, after you finish here at 10 o'clock, how about you come out to Raymond? Because we have lights in it wasn't even a horse arena. It was where they did the ice skating and the games with that in the wintertime, but it had dirt floor, and lights. So you'd be surprised how much you can get together in the ice arena and play with horses. And that's what he did. He'd drive out there and have a 2-hour session out there, which lasted about midnight or so. So he did a lot of extra things in his way to sharing or even acquiring anything to share. But partly he was just that fascinated by Tom's philosophy and Tom's way to work with things. And this, then there was a strong period when people would hear about it, but they would also doubt it and had a kind of a almost negative attitude about it. Some rancher that had been riding all his life and had raised his own stock forever would find in his herd the horse that he'd had the most trouble with, and the line or the breeding of the horses that he'd had the most trouble with. And instead of coming just with the excitement to see what's happening with young horses, there was an attitude of show me this, I'll show you. It was kind of like, okay, you've been saying you can do this. Let me see you do it. Nanny. There was a tough row there that lasted for probably 5 years of doing the clinics, first extreme challenging time when many people would just come with the excitement of wanting to learn a little bit of something different. But there were always, I won't even say often, I'd say almost always, somebody who had a, well, really, you show me attitude, and would bring, if you were doing something else, you'd call it stick a ringer in there.
Yeah.
But anyway, extremely challenging situations. And so it got kind of rough for a while. However, the method or the philosophy that Tom had brought to us was so unique and so provable, but probably it took a person who had worked through difficulties, like the little boy that was crippled, because even as a young adult, after we went to California, this same problem that he'd been born with and had been being careful to how he overused or did not overuse his foot erupted when he was about 30, after he'd ridden many, many horses and been around a long time doing colts. He got into a situation where he was supposed to be starting colts for somebody else. And then it turned out this guy's theory was to do most of it on your feet, where on foot in the smaller round corral, which was doable if you had the physical ability to do it. A little stressful if you had a bad leg or a bad foot.
Yeah.
And then the job added in, oh, and by the way, since you are a farmer to start with, or your raised farm, how about you irrigating these rubber boots? Well, by the time they put the too many hours in the round trail on foot with the irrigation boots in the field in the morning and the night, his foot said, I have had it, and he became crippled and could not even walk as during that period in his adulthood, which wasn't yet 30.
Wow.
But he couldn't participate, he couldn't do anything. Then by that time there was a surgery, and the way things evolved, he was able to have surgery and got involved. We were in California, and the surgery was through a state agency called occupational whatever. It was for somebody who had a physical reason for having to change their occupation. But in Ray's case, after his foot was, it never was to where he could overdo it and not have pain. That never happened. But if he didn't overdo it, he could avoid pain and spend all day starting horses and get by without the pain. And else somebody suggested he go get in a sock race or something. That was non-doable. Anyway, when he got to that point, then there were then the people that had this program called that they called rehabilitating people, that was the idea. Well, Ray said, well, I could, because he already was doing it, so I know he could. I could make more money shooting horses. It's a duel with my foot. And they went, oh, good. We'll fix it up for you to go to shoeing school. And they had a program going on at Cal Poly, and it was they were on quarters, and it was a quarter. You'd have to spend a quarter there too, but you got to learn the forge and all the ways to help a handicapped horse or a challenged horse. Of course, he'd already been shoeing horses since he went to Nevada to ride, and they said, you will shoe your own horses. So he'd been doing it for a long time. So he was pretty excited to be able to, they took somebody else off the list and sent him down. By that time we had 4 kids and a pretty good sized business going on with his car starting the colts and even advancing. Some horses were staying longer than a month. And that's another thing that people didn't realize. how many horses he had worked with before he ever met Tom, because he wasn't getting paid to ride a horse for a year. He was starting coals for the public, and most of the public then had one horse, and they wanted it started preferably in 30 days. And here's your $50, I'll bring the hay. But the turnover of one horse after another was way different than when people and later on he was in the stage where he did what was referred to a little bit more as training, where you kept a horse longer and your goals were different. But starting the colt in the first years was, here's your $50, I'll bring the hay. And I hope you're going to be on that horse every day. Don't
Wow.
forget me.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of horses
Yeah. Yeah.
to make the grocery bill. There was a lot of horses. And a lot of horses mean you had a lot of chances to learn something. She looked at it that way, and he did.
Yeah.
He saw it all as learning.
Yeah.
After he met Tom, he went out and looked for troubled horses. Our corral for 5 years there was a schoolhouse, I'm pretty sure, because he looked for anything. This horse won't lead, this horse won't load, this horse won't. You gets tired on the hillside, he'll lay down and roll on you. There's a lot of different things horses can do to get out of work, and he was getting them all to see what he could do. And when he didn't know what to do, he called Tom, and they talked about it on the phone. But even then, it was probably it was about 2 years after he first met Tom. He set up a situation down where we were staying then, where he had nothing but troubled horses in the corral. And Tom and Bill would drive over from Salinas to where we were outside of Hollister to give advice. And we also had some extra room there. And we had 2 or 3 young men who were just, and some that just came for the day, that all it was a school for troubled horses. I mean, that's all that 10 days was about. Why this horse switches his tail every time you ask him to do something. All those, anything you could imagine of weird and undesirable behavior was worked with in the corrals. So we had it was an old ranch, had a lot of nice corrals, and Bill and Tom came every day.
Wow. I bet that was so incredible to watch.
Oh, it was from morning till night, till dark. And they'd talk about the ones that stayed over, that actually were bunking there in the extra rooms, would talk about it till midnight. How about, yeah. But it certainly increased the learning situation and increased the ability to have something to write. But that's when I first was, I had seen Tom work with the horse Hondu before that, and saw what had happened. But that session, Tom and Bill brought their lunch every day, but they came in and ate with the people I was cooking for, which was a house full. And that was the first time, and I shared this in the new book that Steve Dorrance and John St. Ryan did, the new version of Tom Dorrance, More Than a Horseman. But I shared that Tom was there, and and he already had his sack lunch. So the horse Ray had provided for him to ride was a horse that was in the 2 rein, and a very nice roan horse, but also a horse that was get really bothered with people. He could be eating and a person would be approaching him and he would be getting tighter and tighter and upset, and he could get really bothered about just about anything he could imagine to be bothered about. And Tom had gone outside, and I wanted to ask him something about, I have no idea now, but I went out and had to go out of the house into the yard where the horse was tied up. And when I got out there, Tom was sitting on the horse, and the horse was completely relaxed. Tom was sitting there, looked like he was asleep, and the horse looked like he was asleep. And I thought, oh my gosh, if you can make that connection in that short of time with that horse that's been given, we didn't own it. We brought it down out of Nevada, and it belonged to Randy. And Randy and this horse had a lot going for him, but they had a lot of stress between them. And that horse in the new environment was sitting there completely relaxed. And that was the horse then that Tom used as he worked with the other horses, the problem horses, through this week. It was the session lasted about a week or 8 days or whatever. And it was such a learning experience for everyone. But anyway, that was this has got to be for everybody, because wow, see that man sitting on on the horse's leap, and the horse is asleep. That's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Wow.
So that was I I was completely on it.
Yeah.
Let's follow this. This has got a good way to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then, of course, it takes forever to see where it was going and how much there was to it. But it was certainly amazing because it was so different.
Yeah. Yeah. So Think Harmony has been such an important book for so many people, and it's been around for a good number of years now. I'm sure over the years you've had people reach out to you and have had really interesting responses about it. Are there any that stand out about people who?
Well, actually, just in the process of getting from thinking about it to having it, by the time we got up into Montana, after that session that I'm talking about, where we had nothing but troubled horses on purpose, and then we branched out into doing that, and we had done that after he'd been at the school up in Canada and made those connections. So after that, we branched out quite a bit in the summertime into being in the edge of Canada, because they didn't stop with having him up there for the college. The people in Raymond immediately set up for him to, and because he had something that you couldn't find anybody in Canada that was doing it then, he could legally cross the border and make money.
Yeah.
It was because it was a new thing. He was legal up there in the college, and then in doing the clinics, because it was it was something that was not available to them there. Well, so then it just evolved into we knew people in Montana around Dillon that had come down to participate or to watch some Tom Dorrance things that we were doing in the stateside. And then and in those years, crossing the border was a piece of cake as far as moving. Even taking a horse across wasn't a big jump through. As far as health regulations were easy in those years. And moving around Montana, they were very testy. We had a lot of testing in the various new areas of Montana. Then we got over close to Bozeman, and there was a man that was on the staff at Bozeman. His name was Jess Lair, and his work at the college had to do with psychology and philosophy, and I don't know for sure what classes he taught, but he had written a book he'd put together a book called I Ain't Much, Baby, But I'm All I Got. And it wasn't even it was a kind of a put together at the college book or somewhere there in Bozeman, because I had a first copy and it wasn't a bound book. I don't know how he did it, but by the time we met him, he said, "You are going to make a book, aren't you? You are, aren't you?" Yeah, we kind of think we are. And so he was very instrumental in pushing it into being. And actually, when I got ready, when it was ready to be done, he was cooperative enough that he did the little inside of the flyer of an in-depth study of horse-man relationship, and Jess Lair wrote the article to support the book. And so there was always, and through the people in Montana then, when it was coming down to finishing the book, there was a rancher, but he had other activities. He was also college. He also taught, but he was the one then that wrote the article that I kind of finished there, where he wrote his interpretation of, in fact, we called it an interpretation of the Ray Hunt method of schooling a horse by Vincent Carpenter. So these were people that stood up and were ready to not just encourage, be involved. And for years, Ray had, Gene Lewis from Milwaukee County was really, really good in the jumping horse world, and set some records and produced horses that went to the Olympics and all kinds of exciting things. And we'd been involved in and connected with him on one of our jobs in Nevada after we'd been in California and came back. Then we were with Gene. So Gene was available and participated in doing the forward for the book. So there was enough other people that cared that much for it to grow and become that we got a lot of by that time we got a lot of help, a little here, a little there. Some of them just, "You are doing this, I'm waiting." I am waiting. Are you going to get through? And I had the most fun, the nicest compliment Well, two things happened after the book was done. I handed a copy to Tom Marvel, and he said, "Oh, it's a real book." I guess he thought it would be a booklet type thing. That's what he thought. And Tom Dorrance read it, and he said, "You've got some of it." Biggest compliment. We wouldn't have printed it if he hadn't have. He read it before it was printed and was okay and said, "You have some of it." And that was a extreme endorsement as far as I
Yeah.
was. I was doing all right when he said that.
Yeah.
Those are the two compliments. And this Jess Lair said, "Oh, now you've done it." He said, only 2% of the people that talk about doing a book ever do it.
Hmm.
And amazed me, but 30 years later, I was watching this program that was very popular on television. And that lady would introduce you to people that had written a book, and she endorsed that with people and encouraged it. Anyway, the bottom line was, she said one day on that program, only 3% of the people that ever start this do this. And I went, well, how about that? Well, I was kind of amazed
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
it was still a statistic 30 years after. Well, no, the statistic had added 1 more percent.
Well, 1%. Yeah. Yeah.
But it was not something people did. Writers were supposed to write, and people like us were supposed to read it. And it was kind of a new idea. A lot of people have done it since then.
Yeah.
Self-published, but that was self-published.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the process has gotten more accessible, because back when you wrote this book, it was yeah, self-publishing was not really a thing.
It wasn't what people were doing, but we kind of had to do it because we promised them a book. So, a book.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, is there any would you like to read any section from the book to share with us today?
I do have, interestingly enough, I think probably the beginning, just the basic thing that I did underline something, and I'll find it without waiting too long. Okay, here's where I am. It says in the section called Think Harmony with Horses, an in-depth study of horseman relationship. And he says, for several years now, I've been traveling around the country, working with groups of riders who are interested in my philosophy of harmony and getting along. And then I drop down. The principles are effective regardless of the age or previous experience of the riders. It doesn't make any difference if I'm working with a Far East group in Idaho, buckaroos in Nevada, or riders on English tack at a California stable. The horse can be grade to expensive, registered, whatever, and it's basically all the same. I even had a young man in a class once in California on a mule. He and the mule were excellent material to work with. The young man tried hard to understand me, while the mule tried hard to understand him. At the end of the clinic, we had a good thing going. Of course, vocabulary and presentation differ quite a bit from group to group, depending on the age or experience of the rider, but don't look for a change in philosophy. And it goes a little further and says that I didn't get the page open. The aims and goals are constant, even if the approach seems to vary. To digest these goals in a capsule for a person need only know feel, timing, and balance. But the truth of the matter is that just those three small terms take a lifetime of chewing before they begin to digest. Though I will use them often, I will not attempt to provide the reader with a concrete description of any of them, for to me they are as abstract and elusive as the candle in the edge of the end of the tunnel. What feel can be to a forage child today, with more chewing each day, will be different. The same is true of a more advanced writer. As the writer grows in awareness and insight, so will the definition of these terms. Each person in the final analysis will write his or her own definition. Day by day, although I cannot give you feel, I hope to fix it up to help the reader or writer find his own definition. And then there's lots of other parts that I underline
Yeah.
that I think are so relevant. Here's another little just stuck out. You don't have to think of making change. A person will say, this will be all right if I can make a change, but you don't change, you just fill in. I know all of you are riding horses. You're catching them. You're getting them saddled up. You're getting on them and you're going. You're backing them up, you're loping them out, and you're doing everything with them. So it is just between there somewhere that your horse is not understanding. Then you will examine it. Then you will explain it a little closer to the horse and just go on. And it's a shortcut in the long run. It's like reading a book, just skipping through and outlining it and knowing the book word by word. If anyone asked you a question about the book, you could really answer it. This is what we do with our horse. We really know them, so we'll know how to help them understand us. And always, you're working on yourself, not the horse. He never says that any other way.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just thinking about the first passage, I mean, right there from the beginning, it's something that's for every person and every horse, but it's not a static thing. It's evolving, and you have to work on it and improve for yourself. And I think that's I mean, it's so hard for people, but it's so clear to the horse.
It's clear. It seems to be easy for the horse to understand if you're not muddying the water with your own emotions and just thinking about the horse. They do respond to what the writer has in mind. Anyway, and then it has the book itself. We took time to do a question and answer with the questions that people ask the most, and that's included. And another person that influenced was always around that that I wanted to mention was when we were doing clinics, and we were in the Elko County, and I have a picture in there of Charlie Van Norman of Tuscarora, Nevada, at Spring Creek during the 1977 Dorrance Hunt Clinic. That's when Ray and Tom began to have it. That was probably the first big one. A lot of people came down from Canada that year. And it says, he is a successful rancher and an accomplished horseman. He was a real asset to the class. With his sincere question and eager mind, he came to learn. Now, this was a man that had been riding a horse all of his life. and was a very good hand and was raising good horses. He was a real asset to the class with his sincere questions and eager mind. He came to learn, and he helped displace the myth of Western ranch culture that youth and strength are the prime requirement for breaking a horse. There is a lot of value for the horse and horseman in experience, wisdom, and an ageless learning attitude. And I so appreciated that at these events, often and almost always, we had the local, almost sage, you might say, that had lived with horses all his life and could understand even though some of this was a new concept, some of it was things they'd thought about and hadn't put a word to or hadn't had a vocabulary to share with, but had come somewhat close to the ideas and would pick them up faster than the young ones who was depending on their strength and agility to ride the bronc. So it was a learning thing for everybody, not just about horses, but life. The clinics became pretty interesting to be around.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, there were. And then, and then, like I say, it kind of, then there were people that began to fill in the blanks with whatever they could find. And some of it didn't seem as much like what you started out with. But Tom had such a gift. He was not, it wasn't something you could just hand somebody on a platter, because it still had to do with working on yourself.
Yeah.
Who wants to work on that? Oh my.
That's a lot of work.
Who wants to work on that? Hardly anybody. Yeah, one of my favorite stories I'll tell on myself, and it has to do with communicating with Tom. In the later years, this Think Harmony was published in 1978, and Tom's book was done in 1987. And so this was way beyond that. But in a different time after that, Tom was at my house, and we had it was a house we were placed, not just a house, it was a ranch we were leasing, but it had peacocks on it, and they'd been on there since it had been a dairy way back when. So they thought they owned the place, and they went everywhere. And I wanted to work on a yard inside my yard. I want my flowers to be the boss and not the peacocks. So I would go out and throw a stick at them to come in my yard. And Tom was there early because at that point, Georgia and I lived in a central area, and Tom was waiting. Actually, he was waiting for Joe Walters to come. And Joe had a problem with a horse, and he was going to show it to Tom, and Tom was going to visit. So as that was set out, Tom didn't have enough to do, I guess. He was watching me and watching. And he said, Millie, you don't have to have that problem with those peacocks. He says, I could teach you, and you could work with those peacocks till they wouldn't even want to come in your yard. They'd respect you, and they'd stay out of the yard. And I thought for a few minutes, and I really and truly believe he could have taught me. And I think it would have been simple enough. I could have learned. But you know what I said? I don't want to. I got this music here. I want to throw a stick. I'm on the low end of the totem pole today. And if something else don't help here, this is my therapy. I'm gonna throw a stick at that damn peacock. And I did.
Yeah.
Continue our relationship. When they got in the yard, I threw at him.
But now I'm going to wonder what he would have had you do to train the peacocks.
I think it probably wouldn't have been that serious. And I think it was because I'd seen him do it with everything.
Yeah.
Everything that he lived with. And I used to, this I'll probably never go in a book, but I used to tell him, those young men that want to do a Tom Dorrance thing in the corral, I'm going to show a picture of you helping Margaret with the dishes and all the other things you do. And instead of that, they drive in my driveway, park in the middle, leaves the outfit running and the door open. So there's a lot of things to learn.
Yeah, not just in the round corral.
Not just in the round corral. And it all is involved in working on yourself to notice there is somebody else out there and some other need.
Yeah.
Some other idea. Anyway, so much for that.
Well, good. Well, I know that we could probably talk for forever, but are there any questions that I didn't ask you about Think Harmony that we should visit about today?
If there are, I'll probably, can you think of anything? That was the biggest, most exciting time. And it's a miracle that Ray didn't get hurt in those first years, because some of the stuff the JQ public pulled on him was pretty rough horses, and he would manage to get it done.
Yeah.
But probably he learned to do that when he was a little boy and couldn't walk.
Yeah. Well, it's just, I mean, it's interesting to think about the whole arc of somebody who has a physical challenge, but who has also had a ton of experience, but that empathy, that drive, that desire to succeed, like all of those pieces, but then being hurt and having to come up with the language. I mean, it's all the little pieces fit together.
Yes. And the different experiences, like I say, there were some wonderful mentors along the road that were contributing in different areas, and that was true too. Like in Montana, after somebody was like, "Oops, I've never seen that," and somewhat doubting, they were just as supportive, and not just supportive, but I don't know how to say it, but loyal.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, once they joined up, they kind of stayed in that frame of mind. It was enough of a proof to them that they took it in as their method and used it, and would share. They would share they would call Ray and say, I did this and I did that and this didn't work. And they could communicate well enough that he could say, I'm picturing this, am I right? There became to be enough vocabulary to communicate about it, so that Ray could actually get something from Tom on the phone, or support some new person or some younger person, or some, give suggestions. Nothing was ever considered this is the only way to do it. in the late years, after so many got quite a lot from Tom, in his last days, between his first stroke and his second stroke, Tom talked to me, and pretty serious, and he said, I feel bad I couldn't leave it, meaning the whole the whole ability, the whole vision, couldn't leave it with anybody. And I said, well, we all tried. And the thing of it is, a lot of people got some things, some people got a lot of things, and a lot of horses got a new chance. And we managed to record some of it by a film and tapes and written to have a source for somebody to go back to further it. And so I don't think we failed. I told him, and I always told him that, well, maybe it'll be, maybe who knows, some grandkid or something later, this is going to more and more of it be clear. And I've been excited to watch my own grandkids use it. And in fact, they don't even know there was any, they don't know what out behind the barn used to look like in some spots.
Yeah.
They've never seen that.
Yeah.
But it's kind of nice when they get to start partway up the road. Partway up the road. Anyway.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
But yes, a person can talk about this, different instances and different angles and different days with it, because it covered, like I say, we had, before the book came out, we had met Tom 18 years before. So there was lots and lots of communication before we had vocabulary.
Yeah. Well, that one question while you're talking there that sort of popped up. I'm not quite sure how to phrase it, but when I think about those early, so one sort of criticism that I've heard people say about clinics is, well, the people just come for socializing. They're not serious enough. There's sort of that negative statement, but in those early days, I would imagine that there was a lot of social, like what was it? Were people there? They were gathered, they were excited, they were focused on the horses, but there had to be that sort of human visiting aspect. Yeah.
Oh yeah. There was always a lot of that. And I wouldn't consider it negative, because in any group, even well, to the end of his life, Tom could be just as interested and be emotionally involved and interested in an 11-year-old kid riding a pony, and they having the harmony, the communication that he wanted to see in a rider and a horse. And he could be as fascinated by that as he was the guy out there working a cow, and especially way more than if he was looking over the fence and saw the guy in a how would you put it? Here's this kid, and he doesn't even, he just has a halter and is doing everything he wants to do, and the horse is doing everything the kid wants to do. Always made a better picture than for Tom than looking over and seeing the guy in the in the bit that he kept hidden in the back room, working over the horse to get a response to show in the coming up show. He could get a lot more enjoyment out of the kid than he did over looking over the fence at the guy.
Yeah.
Because during that period, not everybody, but many people were were not just working stock horses at the ranch. They had started doing it in suburbia because we had begun to have one. We didn't even have one in the years prior to any great extent in the years prior to World War II, because we had farming, ranching, and then we had city, two different things. But when the lawyers and doctors and professional people that came back from World War II and went to college and had an in-town job and still had so much country in them that they wanted to have horses for their kids, you begin to have a whole different element that we talked about when we were talking about the horse gods. It was, and it went so fast that people showing horses and won trophies when the ribbons were getting important. They were using what we used to call gimmicks. I don't know what else to call them, but they were abusive headgear and abusive things that they were using to inflict discomfort and or pain to animals so they could get their own way in a fast stop or spin around or whatever. And Tom he was way more interested in watching a kid do it naturally than he was anything like that. That was so completely out of his realm of thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
That as far as socializing, he would probably more often than not leave the adults and go play with the kids.
Yeah.
He doesn't kind of do that, especially if the kids weren't getting much attention. He was pretty good about wanting to. And in his in his youth, he had worked in his hometown, not just with the ranchers and stuff. He'd worked with 4-H groups and stuff and their horse projects and that kind of stuff. Because when you're in a community, you do community things. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Yes, it's probably socializing. And if they don't talk so loud that you can't hear the action, but if you get over in a little shady spot on the corral and ignore the socializing, you make a choice there yourselves. You make a choice, and they'll say extremely noisy. This still is your choice. And Tom could work with a corral full of people and still know what was going on in the corral behind his back. And I've seen him do it a dozen times. The horse or something, some motion would change in the corral behind him, and he would be on the mic and address the person that just had the question or working out not a verbal question, but it had happened. The horse had grabbed itself and jumped or whatever was going to be the man's question. And I've seen him answer the question with his back turned. And I said, how'd you do that? Well, I said, when he came in the gate, I knew it was going to happen pretty soon. I said, okay. But I had turned around and looked.
Yeah.
He already knew what was going on.
He already knew.
He already knew it was going to happen. Just a matter of time. So if somebody is really one and they, paid a gate to get in, they probably should get down on the edge of the corral. I kind of used to get on the edge of the corral under, some of those corrals have some shade. I mean, the corral itself will shade you if you stand in the right place.
Yeah.
It's all and especially now that have a bajillion things that I have to adjust every day. I don't know how many times in any one day I've heard Tom say, adjust to fit the situation. And Ray never got to quoting that one, but Tom never quit.
Oh, wonderful. Well, thank you so much today for visiting, Millie. I really enjoyed this, and thank you so much for bringing this book into the world for all of us to enjoy.
Well, like I say, I had a lot of support. I had a lot of encouragement, and it was a natural thing to happen. It was just as natural as needing needing to make some changes with the horse, and where you got to learn something for yourself.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that pretty.
wonderful.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.
Thank you.